So, but I think that after the pandemic, what became very clear is that education can't simply be a place for students to come and receive academic content and go home.
No time, no tools, big expectations. How do you transform school culture without derailing the train? Answer: little wins that bring big changes. The flywheel effect. Harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.
All right, hello and welcome. My name is Jordan Pruitt. I'm here with my co-host, Dana Murphy. We're both former educators now working with the live school team to support your school's culture vision. Our show focuses on all the opportunities for little wins that can create big changes in school culture. The flywheel effect is all about sharing stories of admin and school support staff and other educational change agents that have succeeded in their initial lifts and created cultures that have so much momentum that they grow and improve exponentially. Today, we're joined by David Olinger of O'Day High School in Seattle, Washington. David is the Director of Digital Strategy for O'Day. We were introduced to David through the House System Symposium Conference in June, where he presented on change management. And David, that's why we thought you'd be a great guest on our show, change management being what we discuss a lot here. So if you want to take a second, talk about what you've been working on, how your summer's been, and we'll jump in.
First off, Jordan and Anna, thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here and share some of the things I've learned working in education and working at the forefront of change. This summer's been great. There's a lot to reflect on because I believe that we're coming out of a seismic shift in the way we do work, the way we teach, the way we learn. And I think that many people think we got out of the change once schools got back on the campus, but I still think we're very much in a disruptive time. So I'm really important to talk about. I'm really excited to talk about this important topic.
Well, and as Jordan mentioned, we were introduced to you through the House System Institute, which I actually attended at O'Day High School. And it was even before we started recording, we were talking about house points versus house system because points are just one part of it. But O'Day has been doing the house system for years now. And I'm just kind of wondering if you can, for a lot of people, the house system, like I learned this at the symposium at the House System Institute, is new to a lot of schools or kind of a concept that maybe they've heard of but don't fully understand. Can you talk about what it is and what it looks like at O'Day?
Sure. The house system is really based upon this old European system of education that began with boarding schools. The intent, of course, was children are being taken from their homes, and how can you reinvent a space where people feel at home, where they have brothers and sisters, where they have caregivers, where their needs are met beyond the academic space. And this is a system that's been implemented in a lot of schools that are not boarding schools, such as O'Day High School. And we really did it because one of the things that brings people together is a sense of identity. And I know that at least when I reflect on my high school experience, I didn't really have a sense of identity at that school in regards to how I connected to the school until junior or senior year. And so, a lot of things that lead to that, we wanted to use a system to amplify, to make happen quicker. And the house system was a really great way to do it because instead of just identifying with your graduation year, the class of, for me, it was the class of 1996. And, you can identify with this house. It's a mixed grade level. So you can identify with students who are, and you meet students right away who are juniors, who are seniors. And you're not just this sort of island of freshmen trying to figure it out on your own. So I think the first thing is based on this premise of, to feel connected to a place, you have to be seen, you have to be known, but you also have to feel like you see and know others. And so the basis of it is just bringing students together on a daily basis. They go to a mentor group and they're with the same group of students and they see each other every single day with the same teacher and the same group of students throughout their 4 years. And they can really develop relationships that are deep throughout.
So first off, Freshman Island sounds like a tough place to be. I used to teach at a freshman academy, and if it was an island, that would have been a lot harder. Thing that I heard the most there was the thing that really all schools should be striving to do would be trying to make communities. That's successful culture is tied to communities, And that's what you guys are trying to do with your house system, which I think is awesome. I also really like the idea of like what's old is new again, because this is like, it's not a new idea. You know what I mean? And it's all comes back to how do you create communities? Um, so David, we're going to jump in, and our first segment is a lot about you and your career. So we call it change makers. So it's a way for you to kind of introduce yourself through some of the things you've worked on and tell us about your career. Because a lot of our listeners are not only listening to scale up culture in their district or their building or the classroom, some of them want to know, like, how do I get in position to be the one who makes the flywheel move? Like, how do I make a big impact? So the first question I wanted to ask you was, what was your career like before you were tasked with implementing house systems, and specifically before you're in the position you're in now, as in like a director role? How has that experience shaped your leadership style now?
Well, I'm very fortunate to have worked in one place basically my entire career. I've been at O'Day High School. I started here in 2002, and I was hired initially to teach English and religion, which I did for, well, I taught religion for a couple of years. My background's actually in theology. I have a degree in theology, Catholic theology, and in education and English as my certificated, space would be, English literature. So I was initially hired to teach humanities, and really the cohort of people I went through college with, they started kind of a program, in Cincinnati where I'm from, that was a house system program, and so I was already, hearing the stories of how this can change people. But my career was very much focused on teaching and learning, and um, the reason why I got into education, I think, who knows why we start and go down the path we go to if we reflect on it. But I think I've just always been someone that's innately curious. I want to learn things. Within my second year teaching, I was pitching a new photography program for the school, and I got that running right. Um, Within my fourth year, I took on the challenge of being our service learning coordinator, so coordinating all the service. And I really loved meeting people in all these different agencies and connecting students with these experiences outside of the school, serving others, and kind of getting to the heart, at least for what it means for me to be a Catholic educator, which is teaching young people. Now I'm going to use a lot of male terms because our school is all boys, but teaching these young men to be men of others, to serve others. Like that was really my passion. But I really got a lot out of meeting all these different people around our city who do amazing things. Like there's this woman Minh Duc who started this Helping Link Center for Vietnamese people in her community to help with their help with students and tutoring, and also to help do adult education so that people can learn the English language and be more autonomous. Connecting students with that. I also I developed a photography program. I connected with Photographic Center Northwest and Seattle University, and I developed a program with them and kind of adopted their photography service program where you would embed your photography student at a service agency and they would develop something that was really unique and cool for that specific agency. So I think before, when you say what's my early career, I think I was innately curious about all the things that can be learned, photography, or whether I'm going to be learning about the community of Seattle, which was new to me, and all of the different ways our students can serve there. So, in many ways, I used the school as a platform for me to really grow as a person individually and learn, but in doing so, offering all the opportunities for students. So that was my early career. I was really, classroom teacher, top five classes like everybody else, and then spent a lot of time on the side, shall we say, developing experiences for students to learn, but really it was also for me to learn and grow.
So two things what you said that jumped out to me, David. And they say a lot about the culture you're working in. I've never been there, but like two things jumped out. One, the length of time you spent there, that says a lot about the place. It means something is going right, because you see a lot of short tenures at a lot of schools, and for you to stay that long says a lot about the culture there. And the second thing, you talked about starting new programs and having the freedom to do that, because like a lot of our listeners are going to be school administrators and school leaders at public, charter, private schools. That's one thing I think is a key takeaway there, is the length of your tenure and the amount of good you've been able to do, but probably, I'm assuming, the amount of freedom you've had to run with some of those curiosities and start programs and to do what's best for your students. Am I on the right track there? It just that was my takeaway. Saying like that sounds like a pretty good place to be.
Right. I'm not going to say it was easy. I mean, I got told no for most of these things initially. My photography program, I had to do it for free. And then when the administration decided, hey, this is great, will you teach it full time? But they didn't offer me any extra pay. Then I had to say, well, wait. Before I was just doing it and giving students an experience, more like a club, but now you like it, so you have to pay me for it. And so that's where you start to get into tensions where it gets into this sort of how do you protect your own professional interests, right? That boundary between, where's your curiosity end and the extra stuff you're willing to do for students end, and when is it something that, this, let's say the organization, you're offering a service that they should pay for that you're not willing to do for free. And, I think in this question, you're saying like, well, what's shaped my leadership style? Well, I had to pitch the house system to three different principals. I got told no by all three of them. So even the one that eventually went with it, I was told no. And it wasn't until certain things lined up where it made sense. Okay, this program makes sense now. So timing's a big thing. So for every one thing I did, I probably received 20 to 30 no's, something that was implemented, shall we say, at an official level. So I would say if you really are someone that wants to make an impact, is that, be ready to accept the fact that you're going to have to get your senior leadership on board. And when you're told no, I think the biggest thing is to see that as like, at least they responded. So that's a positive thing. So let's keep moving forward with this no and what can we do with it. But eventually there'll be an opening for, if your ideas are sound and your administrative team is also sound and wise, you can make things happen. But there's a lot of pieces that have to come into play. It took me probably 7 years of pitching the idea of the house system for it to actually then be something that we move forward with at the organization.
Well, and in terms of, pitching that house system, when I was at O'Day and I was speaking to all of those schools, right? Like they're all, as I mentioned, very different points of rolling a house system out. And I'm sure many of them were told no at some point and maybe found you and were able to get, or people at O'Day and able to get, some concrete ways to be able to bring this system to their school. But I guess I'm wondering, one of the things that I've noticed about this house system is connected you all to so many schools across the country.
Yes, I think that our house director, Rory McNulty, I know she gets called a lot from schools who want to do something like the house system. And I think this is somewhat new in the sense that I think the pandemic created a space where schools started to recognize that having a social emotional program, SEL program, which the house system essentially is an SEL program. I think many schools go down this route of like, hey, we need to intentionally teach about SEL. The house system is much more of an experiential social emotional learning experience for students, right? So they have this cohort of people that they become a part of. The teacher or mentor group teacher isn't teaching students how to identify their emotions per se. They're not teaching students necessarily, breathing techniques to calm themselves down. They are, however, creating a community where the goal is, of course, that the students come in and feel as if they're seen and known by an adult. They feel as if they're seen and known by other students. They are challenged to participate in certain competitions. Some of those might be more of like a fun flag football game. Some of the competitions might be building a bridge and seeing, which group can make a bridge that can hold the most weight. Or chess games or esports. But the idea is that through these competitions, they build relationships with their peers and they also learn new things about themselves. So, but I think that after the pandemic, what became very clear is that education can't simply be a place for students to come and receive academic content and go home. And sadly, I think many schools are still, that's the core of what the student experience is an academic experience. And what we're realizing is that if you don't have a really solid social emotional experience for those students, if they don't want to be in that space, they can't learn in that space. So you can put as much effort as you want to in that academic experience. And yes, you're going to have some high achievers that environment is perfect for them because everybody is different. But if you don't embed some great practical supports that support students knowing that they are just human beings coming to a place that they are welcome, that they are known and seen, many students just won't find an environment like that place where they can actually learn because their anxiety will be too high. They don't know who to turn to when they're having a hard time. They don't feel safe talking about things that everybody is experiencing, and that's normal. So I think that's what's happened is there's a lot of schools looking to define what that is for them. And for some schools, the health system makes sense. Something like that makes sense. Other schools, a different program makes sense. But I think right now it's an exciting time because, as you saw, we had hundreds of people here on this small campus in Seattle, Washington, coming from all over the nation to learn about, this program that, well, is I think central to ODay. It's really like one period a day. It's not, ODay is not just a house system, right? It's much more than that. But this is something that really I think the students look forward to. That small group time, that time where they can be with their peers, the time where they can rise up as leaders, as a person, and then move on to their classes.
So, I mean, you're finding a pretty good audience over here with me, man. So I was a dean of students before working for Live School, and like this time of year is back to school time, and about this time of year every year I would do like the like parent nights, and I would do tours for incoming freshmen. I would work our freshman orientation, and I really liked for like transfer students. That was one thing I liked working with their parents when they came in. I'd give parents tours during the end of July, 1st of August. That was a big part of it. And they'd always ask, how are we going to be successful here? And I would always start rattling off all the clubs, organizations, all the teams. Pick something, pick one of them, join one of them, because of what you were saying. Because we can teach SEL, and they're like those programs are good and they're helpful, but if they don't form community, they don't form relationships, they don't form bonds with other folks while they're there. It's just like you said, they're not going to want to be there, and they're not going to be ready to learn. And what sounds like what you guys have worked on was a way to establish that for everyone at your school, which is awesome. Loving it.
But Jordan, I want to take it in a little different direction because I think your audience might be more curious about, well, what does this mean for change? And something I did learn is that when I was on the forefront of advancing this is one of the first changes that I, as an individual, was able to lead, have the opportunity to lead. And I can tell you, in the teaching school, my experience, well, you definitely know how to lead a project with students, or you've been able to lead a field trip with students. That's very different than leading an organization to a different place, and bringing people along. And I think that I at the time was very excited about this program, but I experienced an immense amount of resistance. Many people thought that this was not part of what constituted ODay culture, that it was new. We're talking about a school that started in 1923, and it seems like some of the people that work there have been working there since that initial date. So we have a lot of legacy educators who are very tied to certain things and to that experience. They believe that the ODay experience is X, that it's static. But the truth is that no school's experience is static. Any school you go into that's had any sort of history, if you go back 10 years and you actually really live that student's experience, is probably very different than the current student. And that's just true anyway. But what I learned is that, people change for a reason. And that reason isn't because someone from their school brought a great idea, right? People have to have their own reason for change. That's like one of the biggest precepts I think that I learned about change is that people choose to. People aren't going to change just because their boss says, "Hey, we're doing this different now." Sadly, or maybe most people don't change just because they're given a directive to, right? So everybody has to have a reason to change. And while I was very excited about this program, that doesn't mean that everybody else was. And so I think as you lead change, something I've heard leaders say is like, well, if they don't like this new program, they'll find someone else to work. Well, that's not always true either. They may actually find a way to cause your change or make your change less successful or to get in the way. And that might not be malicious. It might be because they just don't understand, that you haven't spent enough time to understand them. Really, change starts at a very granular level at individuals, whether those individuals are teachers or students or families or even alumni of the school. So finding ways to make sure that each individual understands the change, that each individual can find their own reason to embrace it. That's just as important as having a great change that you're doing.
Yeah, the idea is not necessarily as important as the execution. And then being intentional. And I think particularly in schools, it's a lot harder, not really because like educators are tough to change. That's not really the case. I don't think according to anybody else. But because, like, just by nature of what we do, you end up kind of siloed, and you end up with your own routines and stuff, and you're a little bit more resistant to give up things. I mean, you got your own classroom for the most part, you know what I mean, or your own hallway as a principal, maybe. Last one on the career stuff. Looking at education from a big view, what's the biggest rock that needs to be lifted? What's the one thing, if you could say, all right, smartest educators in the country, this is what you all should be trying to do?
Well, I think I'm not going to say anything that I don't think people know already, is that people are different. And I think for many, many years, we treat students like they're bottles of wine. They're a certain vintage and they go through a process until they're released at graduation. And I think our biggest rock is how do we individualize the way in which we serve our students. I don't know. I think it's a huge lift. I think technology, which is the space I'm in now, provides a lot of opportunities to make that happen. But I think that right now, maybe if we look organizationally and politically, it's still very hard to do that because you have states that control the, kind of the flow of school, or the standards, or the outcomes people have to meet. I think our biggest rock is how do we individualize the learning experience so we can tap into student passions, we can tap into student curiosity, well, at the same time ensure that all schools are providing a valuable product, a valuable experience for those who go there, that meets some sort of standard come up that is that's developed by whether that's the state or whatever governing organization overlooks the school. But I think that's our biggest thing is personalization. Finding ways to tap into student curiosity, finding ways that the student takes control of their own learning. Because the truth is that I'm a Gen Xer. When I graduated, I thought I'd be working in a hierarchical system where there is a boss, and that boss tells me what to do, and I execute it. And maybe someday I'll be the boss, and I get to tell people what to do. But the truth is that our students today are going to be entering into a space much more that's going to have many more flat organizations where they're going to have to come up with their own initiatives, where their careers are going to change perhaps yearly. When many people in my generation, maybe they had 2 careers, 3 careers. Graduates today, they're going to have many different careers, and they're going to have to learn how to develop their own skills to achieve the goals they set for themselves, um, and develop their own purpose. So I think that's one of the biggest rocks because we're still very much in this sort of siloed, like when you're a ninth grader, you take these courses and you get to choose one or two. We're very much into sort of like you get told the path you're on it, but then they graduate to a world that isn't like that anymore. And I think that's our biggest challenge.
Well, I agree with all of that. I just wanted to add that comparing students to bottles of wine feels like a very Pacific Northwest thing to do. I know you have a big wine scene in Washington, so I just as someone from Oregon, I really appreciate that. So
I used to work at a restaurant and sell wine. I really like that. I thought I'd probably go into the wine industry, but here I am, just using the.
The idea of customization and personalization and like that, teaching students how to be able to pivot and adjust on things when they're good at things. I think that's a big deal, and it's really tough to do as it is currently. But it's something that, like you said, they're going to have to do some of that, and majority of them are going to have to. All right, so we'll move into segment 3. We call this "Let's Move the Flywheel." So that's the whole idea of the flywheel effect is initial lifts, and then you create momentum. And now we're going to talk about changes that you've experienced or been a part of. You can talk about house systems, or you can talk about any other that you'd like to. The first question I got for you: can you share one story of a small change that you led or observed that deliberately changed the culture of a school? Like you guys implemented this change, and then it grew into something much different and very positive.
I think that any initiative is going to be a series of small changes. I think one small change that I can't call it small though because it's our, we had a one-to-one program launch. That's what one of the things I was responsible for was our digital classroom transformation. And so you have to make a lot of decisions when advancing any initiative that's an all school change, whether that's a social emotional program or in this case the digital transformation. I remember being in I really believe doing a lot of your front load work, a lot of research, a lot of homework, talk to people. And I was when we were looking at, hey, what are we going to do with this one-to-one program? Many of the schools around us have a bring your own device program, and someone in my role, the IT role, would say, here's the minimum specs that you need, but choose your own device. And I remember going to schools that did that, and you know, those teachers have all sorts of different issues because every computer has its own sort of unique way that it breaks and its own unique way that it works. And so the teachers had to be these experts in all these different technologies. And I remember one of the things that I noticed is that I knew that I wanted digital ink to be mandated for any device they had, but I also noticed this one school had Microsoft Surfaces, and that none of the teachers complained about the technology. It was just ubiquitous. It was there. It was used. The tool itself was able to be. You could annotate. You could do all these things that some desktop computers or laptop computers just couldn't do. And this might be a big change, a small change, but I remember having to really convince our administrative team that look, we should tell people exactly what device to bring to school. We weren't going to buy them like the public schools do because we're a private school. We were going to ask our families to purchase them, but ensuring that the students have the same type of device, the same operating system, the same capabilities, really ensured more success to happen in the classroom because the teachers, as they design their lessons, they're designing basically to an environment, to a singular environment, as opposed to having to design for an iPad and a computer and where the tech I think we put away. So I think maybe the small change would be thinking about, as you make your choice of what the change is going to be, to think about all the different possibilities. And I think a question to really ask is kind of like, am I creating more problems than I'm solving by this solution? Yes, we solved the one-to-one program, but did that solution create more problems in its solution? And asking a lot of questions because that's where you discover things. Uh, that's one of the small changes would be that we went with a single device, the Microsoft Surface, because of its digital linking capacity, touchscreen. Another one would be when we went to this sort of digital space. We made the decision to make everything digital, right? So, um, and this may be a popular or unpopular, but we decided that any textbook that was going to be brought to the school had to be able to be a digital textbook because that would ensure that everything's kind of living in the space. They would have a very thin backpack. They wouldn't have to bring the device. And, as we did that, we decided as a school that instead of asking the students to buy the digital book, that the school would to save a lot of money and to harmonize that experience. And that was maybe the small change that really actually helped everyone get on board with using the technology because now they no longer had a textbook in front of them and a device in front of them. They just had the device. And that device was their textbook. It was their notebook. It was their annotating device. Um, so I don't know. Maybe those aren't the stories you're looking for. Maybe that's not that interesting.
No, actually, that David, that is a perfect example because you're talking about one decision that led to eventually a more positive school culture because of everyone being on the same page, everybody using the same thing, and the logistics. I've been in two schools that went one to one and like went through that process. One was um, it was like a grant situation, and like, all right, let's do this right now, and it was kind of like a surprise. And the other one, like the building was built for it, and it was much smoother than the other one, obviously. But the amount of thought I saw like in between the two that had to go into it, because once you decide what device they're going to use, or if you're going to have sync everybody's and all these things, like that determines all the software, the LMS, all the other things, and it determines your PD. So it's a small change, but like you said, being able to have everybody on the same page was a big deal, I'm sure, and like that created a big ripple effect for you guys. The follow up question to that is, can you share a story of a time when change failed?
I can tell you a story. I think that I don't think changes fail per se. I think almost any school that's advancing a change, there's a good reason for it. And that the change itself isn't a bad idea, and the change. But I would say that as a leader, I think my primary role is to generate positive energy around what we're doing. Now, that doesn't mean pleasing everybody. In fact, sometimes it's quite the opposite. For example, the story I shared about the Microsoft Surface Bike, there's a lot of teachers that didn't like the idea of the Surface. They liked laptops. They didn't like a tablet laptop hybrid. Um, Lots of teachers, most of the teachers didn't like the idea of digital textbooks. So it's not about necessarily generating positive energy, but I would say that initially with the house system, there was some conflict, and um, that conflict usually arose from people, not knowing what this change means for them, right? So I might use the example of, as you advance a change, some people might, let's say you're changing someone's leadership program, right? You have this new program, and the new program is this whole thing, like the house is a whole different leadership program than, let's say, an ASB leadership. And without really careful conversations with people that were in charge of those things, you may unintentionally send a message that their work was not valuable. And so this is more valuable and just get on board. So I think one of the big, stories that I could share of like change failing is usually when people take it personally, or when you are as a leader, you're not being as mindful in the way someone might take the change. You're not being mindful that any change means that which came before really needs to be honored. And I think that maybe that's the best way to put it. Change fails when you don't honor the people that have done the work before that change. And you don't honor that their work was valuable, and that the change isn't based upon them not doing their jobs well, or even that the product they were doing, the experience they were doing was poor. And I think as a leader, it's maybe easy to forget that you're all excited about this new idea, but some people might be really excited about all the stuff they have been doing. And how are you going to honor that in the transition? And how does that get celebrated, and how does that get ingested into the change? Um, I've seen leaders that come in and they want to make all these changes because they think they can see all of the black eyes and all of the blemishes of the organization. But the truth is that most people in organizations, they want success. They know what success looks like. And if the change that any leader looks at thinks they think it's that important, the likelihood is that if it was easy to change, if it was easy to get there, it would have already been done. It would have already been happening. And so I think that's probably, if when does change fail? I think, as opposed to the time when it failed, it usually fails because you're not being mindful of the people that the change affects. There's people that are going to have to actually do the work of the change, and usually it's by not honoring the work they did before. So
That's a very like key idea that hasn't actually been brought up on this discussion board. We asked similar questions. The idea of mindfulness, because and that's part of like SEL programs, and we teach kids how to be mindful of others. You know what I mean? Um, but that's a big deal that I don't think like we think about it as adults. Like when we're trying to change organizations, be mindful of the work that's been done before you, because like you said, they valued it, and they put a lot of work into it, and it was probably successful at least for them. So that's a big deal. So being mindful of others, like when you're trying to make something like a large change, like a house system, there's going to be things are going to change that maybe are not intentional. Um,
yeah, I think having lots of conversations and making sure that oftentimes middle managers are the ones who lead change, and finding ways to make sure that the senior leadership, the principals, assistant principals are up front as well. That they're not just in the background. That can help a lot too.
yeah, the we did some work with a principal from Ohio, and she talked about getting early adopters on things and kind of using that to kind of spearhead like momentum later on, which is kind of a similar idea. That was early conversations, and she used that to catapult some change. Um, Last question we're going to ask you: what advice would you give educators who are trying to find ways to improve culture in a way that can scale? And what I mean by that, and be sustained. So think about it either from, and you can pick your point of view here, either as a teacher, administrator, or as a district personnel, um, something that they could do that goes past their position, past their funnel, and last. You know what I mean? So what advice would you give?
Well, I think that what I spoke of before is that it doesn't, oftentimes it's not the idea. I mean, if you want something to be successful and sustained, um, I think that ego is the biggest killer of change. I mean, if the idea is that there's a leader out there leading change, I think that that change would probably die pretty quickly, um, because people don't mind following. But I think that the more and more you can celebrate, um, those people who do the work, the more and more you can honor those people that do the work, the likelihood is that your change is going to be more successful. You mentioned that you had a colleague or a friend that said, "Hey, let's find the early adopters." And I know that there's a lot of conversation about, hey, there are the early adopters, the middle adopters, and then the never adopters, and that somehow everybody can fall into this bucket. But I think the truth of the matter is that everybody has a reason for changing, right? And so as you look to there's no never adopters out there. Everybody can adopt the change, right? We can see that with the iPhone. And at this point, people are forced to have a smartphone. You can't even engage in things half the time now without a smartphone. So you can't be a curmudgeon saying I'm never going to have a smartphone. That's sometimes change gets just thrust upon you because all of a sudden everybody is moved in that certain direction. But I would say that you know people that want to make a change is to build relationships. I think I have a certificate in pro side change management. I could recommend that program to anybody. Go get a change management certificate somewhere, study change. It's a science, right? There's some things you can really learn, but the pro sci model, they do a lot of research. And one of the research studies, or many of the research studies, come back to say that if you don't have a top level administrator that is on board and championing your change, it's likely to fail. So from that, I would say the most important thing is to make sure that the change that you're trying to lead, you have buy-in with your administrative team, that those people who are charged and have the authority to make decisions. You definitely want to build alliances and coalitions with those below you, but without that true understanding, without that leader at the top, really understanding the change, really understanding and being bought into the why, and giving you that resource of his or her time and attention, um, and sponsoring it, then it's probably not going to be successful. I would say the second thing is to really focus on the people that have to do the change. Um, you can focus on the change itself, the describing of that change, but it's finding ways to really raise people's awareness of the need for it and raise their desire to change. Those are the things you should do first, raising awareness and desire before you try to train people on what it is. So finding ways to do that. An example might be, let's say you want to bring in a new technology program, and or let's say you want to bring in a new social emotional learning program, or whatever little change you want to do. It should be serving probably students in some way, shape, or form. Maybe find a way to find students who really want that change to talk to the teachers about it, because I think genuinely teachers do care about their students more than they care about almost anybody else talking to them. So finding ways to raise their desire through finding things that the teachers care about or the people that have to change care about, and forefront of that.
Two things jumped at me from what you said there. You talked about getting students on board with change. That's one of the things, like we talk about PBIS in schools, is try to get a student on a committee, try to get several students on a committee to get their input on things. Because a lot of times, if you're trying to do these expectations and rewards and those kind of things, if it doesn't matter to the kids, then it didn't really accomplish anything. And the other thing you said that stuck out to me is I'm a football coach for a long time too, and if I get this wrong, I'm going to get an email from somebody who listens. But um, I think it was Bear Bryant who used to have like this quote about if we won, then we all won. If we lost, then I lost. Like, so celebrate everybody's victories, and can take the heat for the losses yourself. But go ahead, Anna.
Oh no, I was just gonna say, like, I appreciate the empathy and like the psychology of change too, and how you focused on that in terms of these initiatives as well. Like, I just think that's a powerful way to lead and to grow as a leader too. for anyone listening who wants to connect with you, where can the listeners find you? Is there any resources you have out there you'd like to share? If someone wants to learn more about the house system at O'Day, where can they go?
Well, if they want to learn more about the house system, they should reach out to our director of house, Rory McNulty, McNulty at o'day.org. I'm really interested in the processes of change. And if that's something that you're interested in, I'm on Twitter at Olinger David. Um, you can reach out to me on Twitter, DM me. I'm on there. I think that's how you connected with me. I'm on Twitter quite frequently, and I do work with schools occasionally. I do some consulting work and some PDs in this space too. So if that's something that a leader's interested in, that's something I can work with, coming up with some sort of change management plan or consulting on those initiatives that you might have. And so I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter quite.
And I was going to say, I attended one of your sessions on change management and I learned so much. I was taking a ton of pictures of all the slides you put together. So thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us today. We'll also include all of those for anyone listening in the show notes as well, so you can get just easy access to those too. So just check that out. But thank you so much, David.
The flywheel effect, harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.